Before this video starts, I wanted to warn that there will be spoilers for Astral Chain, and I do recommend playing the game if you haven't. However, if you don't intend to play the game, or spoilers simply don't bother you, then you can feel free to keep watching. What's the first thing you're greeted by when starting a new game of Elden Ring, Cyberpunk 2077, or Monster Hunter Rise? It's a character creation screen, urging you to breathe your own life into the blank slate presented before you. You can choose to make the character look like yourself in real life, an alien abomination, your own original character, or whatever your mind comes up with. The thing that these games make sure to keep in mind with things like these is the effect that having an original player-made character will have on the story. In cases like Elden Ring or Monster Hunter, the protagonist is simply a vessel to represent the growth of the player. As the player gets better, the protagonist gets better. There aren't really any major effects on the story that these characters have. They're simply there to be there, which is why character creation works well for them. Cyberpunk is a bit of a different story, with the main character, V, having a direct impact on the story. However, this was taken to a further extent, making V have dialogue, choices, and their own actual personality that makes them feel like a real, living character in the world. Now, you may be thinking, what do these games have to do with Astral Chain? That's what I clicked on the video for. But I promise I brought them up for a reason that I'll explain in just a few minutes. But first, a bit of background about Astral Chain. It's a 3D action game in the same vein as Nier Automata or Bayonetta, but with the twist that you're actually controlling two characters at the same time, the protagonist and a legion, which is one of the enemies that we've tamed to use as our ally. Here's the story setup. In a cyberpunk-esque dystopian future, all of humanity lives on a small floating island called the Ark. The reason for this is that the rest of the world below has become overrun with chimeras, the main enemies that come from an alternate universe known as the Astral Plane. Today, an elite group of agents known as Neuron take up the task of fighting the chimeras with their own weapons, along with the legions. In enters Maximilian Howard, the current chief of Neuron, and with him, his two rookie adopted children. So where exactly did Astral Chain go wrong? Well, it ties back to what I was talking about earlier. When starting the game, you're given the option to play as either a male or female protagonist, and customize them to your liking. The opposite gender that you choose will become your twin sibling named Akira, regardless of gender. The consequences of this is that both you nor your sibling have completely defined characters or relationships. This wouldn't be a problem if those weren't important in games like Elden Ring or Monster Hunter, where the protagonist is simply representing the player. However, in Astral Chain, the protagonist has a more direct impact on the story. Unlike V from Cyberpunk, though, they don't have any real dialogue or set-in-stone characteristics. This leaves Astral Chain in an odd middle area, where it's not dedicated to making the protagonist a vessel for the player, or making them their own completely unique character. This is an issue because the game can't commit to one thing, and ends up being left with a forgettable main character with half-baked relationships. Early on in the game, the twins' father Max sacrifices himself in order to save the two from their legions who become unstable and try to kill them. He's presumed dead from this point on, to be confirmed by the epilogue where it seems his legion carries on his memory. Seeing the protagonist's father killed in front of them should be harrowing and emotional, but the only response we get from them are some grunts and shock. No big scream, emotion, reflection, anything. This continues throughout the entire game, and we rarely see any reactions from the protagonist when big things happen. There isn't any real reason or justification for this either. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that silent protagonists are inherently bad. Not at all. There are plenty of great silent protagonists, characters like Doomslayer, Joker, and Link of all characters. These are great and contribute a lot to their stories, forming their personalities through means other than dialogue, whether it be actions, environments, or representations of their psyches. These are all characters that pull off the silent treatment exceptionally. with tons of things throughout the game forming their personalities and giving reasons as to why they don't speak often, like with the trauma that Joker has in the world that constantly pushes him down. It's why the single line he has at the very end of the game is so cathartic. He's finally fully standing up for himself and opposing the seemingly impossible odds. But you don't always need something like that. Link, throughout his many games, can be so expressive both in his face and in his body. There's a visible personal growth throughout the games, as he both grows in strength and mind, with specifically the gaining of the Master Sword being a turning point in his character arc. The key thing with these silent protagonists that make them work in games that have a more in-depth story is that they're completely set in stone and can't be changed by the player. Link is Link, and the developers could take that into account when scripting sequences in the game. So, I'm not completely opposed to silent protagonists as long as they're done with thought and care. That doesn't seem to be the case with Astral Chain, though. Along with barely any meaningful relationship being shown with their father, causing almost no impact when he dies, there's also a very weird dynamic with them and their sibling. Remember, the sibling's gender changes based on the one that you pick. Of course, this can affect how different players experience the sibling character. But the thing is, the dialogue doesn't change based on gender, so once again, there's no clearly defined personality for each one. The sibling is always going to be uptight and distant, and it never really feels like there's any sibling love between them. There's always something keeping them apart, and the protagonist being completely silent solidifies that fact. There's never really any conversation between them, and they always have to act professionally and like they're on the job. I can't for the life of me glean any semblance of a solid relationship between them. It's just not interesting or compelling. Now that I've talked about the relationship side of it with their father and sibling, there's even more to talk about with the topic of just the protagonist alone. Their characters should still be interesting on their own, like someone like Joker, who's a great character in his own right, even without his party members. However, in this aspect, Astral Chain still falls flat. There aren't any meaningful interactions with the environment, expressions, or dialogue, or even a real character design, because once again, it's completely customizable. The game clearly wants to do something interesting with the protagonist though, so it baffles me that they're so underutilized and blank. There's a really cool moment near the end of the game where the power of the Legion becomes uncontrollable and the protagonist has no choice but to fuse with it, becoming incredibly strong in order to fight their sibling, which the same happened to. The music that plays in the background here is a vocal song, the only one in the game, not counting the opening and credits. The song itself is called Dark Hero, and is sung by the voice actor of the protagonist, the singer obviously being different depending on the gender you choose. It's about breaking free from the restraints of life, sacrificing so that others can survive. This, along with the fact that this is a fight against your own twin sibling, would be such an impactful moment, if only I cared about the perspective this is coming from. It really feels like the developers wanted to make the protagonist a real character here, but again, they remain silent and player created throughout the entire game, despite seemingly having their own ideals and thoughts. And that's the main point that I wanted to get at. This game feels built for a unique, interesting character as the protagonist, with thought-out relationships and their own personality. Because of how integral they are as a character to the story, you wouldn't expect them to be a customizable player character, one that's totally silent at that. It's hard for me to connect with them or feel any emotion towards many moments in the game when they can't either. And this really made the story fall a bit flat for me, and imagining what it could have been with just a small change of having a real character as the protagonist makes me interested in the potential it had. I believe that changing this could make it almost a totally different game, one that would have stuck with players a lot more. But as it is now, Astral Chain's fatal mistake was making the protagonist a customizable, silent player character. Just as I was about to give up. Hey, if you watched the whole video, you have my thanks. I appreciate it, really. It's not my normal kind of video, but it was just something I wanted to talk about and something that I had on my mind. I don't want to end this video on a negative note, so I did want to say that I really enjoyed my time with Astral Chain. It was honestly such a fun and unique game, This was just a one-off video though, I don't see myself really talking about it much again. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.